put it this way, darling. No, it's getting late. I can tell from the planes of your face that you're from out of state. Here in the willows, now here's the deal. Tomorrow's for squares and tonight's for real. Drop me off in groove time. Do you hear the slang of ages? Show me how it's done. Now, did you say you were from the Netherlands? Or was that netherworld? If you grew up in Amsterdam, well then I'm the Duke of Earl. These tabs look iffy, but you say they're good. Let's roll with the homies and knock on wood. Drop me off in groove time. Soothe me with the slang of ages. Show me where I turn. Are you all part of the dream? The end of my life so far. Something halfway in between. You ought to know where'd you go? Where'd you go? Damn, she skipped dimensions. Was it something that I said? Something I was thinking when she opened up my head. Let me make it right, babe, never mind how. It's a crazy little place I know called Be There Now. Drop me off in groove time. Do you hear the slang of ages? Show me how it's done. Drop me off in groove time. Soothe me with the slang of ages. This is where I turn. That's right. Slang me.
See the stars after a setting sun. You run for the money. You don't even know about wild mountain honey. Come on, mama, heal this lonesome man. Grow the tree of wholeness in this desert land. Come on, children, now learn how to run. By heaven, the stars, the moon, and the sun. just for the golden machine. You run for the money. You don't even know about Wild Mountain honey.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, everybody. We're so thrilled to talk to each other. It's so good to have our masks off. But it's time for our program to start. If I could encourage you to take a seat. We hope you ate well and drank well next door or 2 doors down. I'm Simi Ali. I'm the president of the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture. It is such a joy to have you all with us here tonight. Before we begin our conversation together, we're going to change the mood a little bit. We're going to show you a video. And this video puts into dialogue the racial history of the United States. It puts our history in dialogue with an even older history, a mythical history, you could say, recounted in ancient Greek tragedy. And in fact, the very tragedy we're thinking about this evening. So what you're about to see is some video footage from 1968, when then presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy had the terrible task of announcing the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He's addressing a crowd of people in Indianapolis, and in this difficult moment, Robert Kennedy remembers the lines of the ancient playwright Aeschylus. He seems to know them by heart. So we'll let that video roll.
About Martin Luther King.
We have erected up the envelope that can be handled in this.
Could you lower those signs, please? I have some very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. And he once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
So Robert Kennedy delivered those remarks on April 4th, 1968, just 2 months before he too would be assassinated. His words remain alive for us. In fact, they are our concern as we begin our dialogue this evening. At this difficult time for the United States, it is perhaps well to ask what kind of nation we are and what direction we want to move in. These questions feel timely and on occasion urgent. So before we dive in to this conversation, I really need to say thank you to everyone who has made this conversation here at the Dallas Institute possible. There are a number of people I want to thank. We have so many distinguished people with us. I'm going to begin by saying thank you to Jilly Allison of D Magazine, president of D Magazine. Thank you to Nicole Paquette. If you would hold your applause, please. There are, I want to clap for each one of them for quite some time. Nicole Paquette, who's here from the Director of Marketing and Communications of the Communities Foundation of Texas. Is Will Evans here? The dynamic Will Evans. Well, we thank him and we thank everyone connected with Deep Vellum Press. Books are for sale and Deep Vellum is celebrating their 9th birthday. We're proud to have them in Texas. And all of the team members of the Big D Read Steering Committee, if you're here, would you please stand so that now we can applaud you? We especially want to thank our friends at Dwell with Dignity. Teresa Charnock is here, and perhaps there are others, Ashley Sharp. They helped us transform this space. It is thanks to them that we have these lovely chairs to sit in. Please, if you love the way this place looks today, it is thanks to our friends at Dwell with Dignity. So thank you very much. Mary Jane Ryburn did the flower arrangements, one of our advisory board members. Mary Jane Ryburn here and in Stroud House. If you see her, I don't see her this evening, but we owe her thanks too. Jim Schutz has a way of showing up sometimes. If he's here, we say thank you, and if he's not here, well, we'll say thank you later. But we'll be talking about his book for some time. And we have sponsors listed on the program, and I think about to be listed on a slide projected. We could not do this without their help, and so please take a moment, just cast your eye over all these generous and wonderful sponsors who make an event like this possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael McShane, the Dallas Institute's Director of Public Humanities. He will say a little more about the dialogue we are hoping to have tonight, and as our reading continues, we want to talk a little bit about the wisdom of the Greek playwright Aeschylus, whose words meant so much to Robert Kennedy and to our nation in 1968, and which we think still matter to us now. Michael will then introduce our distinguished panelists to lead us in further conversation. Michael.
So today I'm reminded of something that President Barack Obama said in one of his speeches. He quoted William Faulkner. He said, "The past isn't dead, it's not even past." The past isn't dead, it's not even past. Our event's name tonight, Athena's Accommodation, is a hybrid from two sources, Aeschylus's Oresteia and Jim Schutz's The Accommodation. As you know, The Accommodation is a work of history detailing some horrific events in the 19th and 20th century racial history of this city. It chronicles terrifying racist injustice, both explosive and systemic. This past, our past, is certainly not dead. It's increasingly not even past. Unlike The Accommodation, Aeschylus's Oresteia appears as a work of fiction. Tragic fiction. The Oresteia asks, how can a society transcend historical injustice and heal historical trauma? In other words, as I would say, how can we let the past become the past? In both of our works, Schutz's and Aeschylus's, there is the threat that rage will awaken, righteous post-traumatic rage, and that this rage will tear the city to bits. This kind of thing has happened before, and not so long ago and not so far away, as we all know. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, appears in the Oresteia. Her task is to find a way to calm the spirits of righteous anger and revenge, called the Furies. The Furies seek justice for historical crimes. The Furies do not forget the past. That's not how they roll. The Furies come seeking fundamental respect. They are willing to tear the city apart to get it. Of course, Aeschylus's concern is our concern today. For inequity and rage are permanent problems for human beings. In our culture today, surely we can feel in our uneasy bones that the fitfully drowsing Furies are stirring again. In respectable media outlets, we read in all seriousness of a possible second civil war in the United States. Our streets and our capital are filled with unrest. Our distracted minds today recall many historical and ongoing injustices, contested claims and counterclaims about the present and about the past. Consider Dallas's own explosive racial injustices and traumas laid out so well in Schutz's book. Who believes these events are safely in the past? We face questions today about the meaning, context, and remedies for such traumas. Back to the Oresteia, Athena, the goddess of practical wisdom, solves her problem, at least temporarily. She manages to channel, these are the key verbs, she manages to channel the righteous rage of the Furies into a new institution she invents, an institution called the law court, with a trial by jury. That's right, Aeschylus's play gives a mythic representation of the invention of public justice, effectively shifting the problem out of the private sphere of disorderly revenge into something like daytime rationality. The court somehow manages to institutionalize the Furies' righteous anger and make it manageable, channeling it into a more controlled search for justice. With many carrots and a big stick, The big stick is Zeus's thunderbolt, which she threatens to wield. With many carrots and one big stick, Athena manages to persuade the Furies to accept her novel law court idea, right? No one's ever heard of this before, and to accept a new role for themselves in the city. So the society is not torn apart and no fresh blood is shed. For a while, the past slips gently back into the past, decently buried where it belongs, and there is choral, song, and dance. This is what we're calling Athena's Accommodation. Hooray, a happy ending. But, as Dr. Ali reminded me, tragedy is a genre invented by the democratic Athenians as a way of transmuting the hardest human dilemmas into a cathartic public art form. So here's a puzzle. If the Oresteia has a dancingly happy ending, then how is it a tragedy? The goddess of wisdom knows that the Furies, those spirits of righteous wrath, they cannot be annihilated. They cannot be permanently exiled. For a moment, maybe they are mollified, but spirits of wrath are always with us, always threatening to return in their formerly old, angry form. So maybe next time or next place, the spirit of righteous wrath won't be so easily accommodated. Athena's old tricks may not work again. Maybe our Furies won't go so meekly into their new clothes. Maybe they will destroy our civilization instead. It has happened before. So a functioning justice system is a fragile, almost imponderable thing. If you've ever lived in a place where the rule of law is tenuous, then you know what I mean. From the outside, justice feels like a miracle, like a deus, or in this case, a dea ex machina, because of Athena, dea. Aeschylus's lesson for us is that an effective justice system feels like a precious miracle. If we have it, we should guard it and not take it for granted. When we lose it, it's not easy to regain. For the spirit of righteous wrath is just part of the human soul. It's not going away. The human soul just essentially is some unthinkable hybrid of reason and wrath. This is the tragedy. So the Furies, those spirits of anger and retaliation, they will reawaken, especially if the institutions designed to do their work, such as courts and laws, become decadent. If those institutions appear too corrupt or too hypocritical, indeed, if the institutions don't seem to provide enough justice, then the Furies will return. And with them comes a renewed interest in a terrible history that is, again, not dead, not even past. We might call it a ghost history or an undead past. Perhaps this is what has happened in our own culture today, so much characterized by righteous fury and increasingly haunted by the ghastly wrongs of our undead and unburied past. In our discussions here this evening, we seek the wisdom of Athena again for our own times. What is required to address our own city's trauma, to repair our injustices, calm our furies? Do we need a dea ex machina today? Where is wisdom now? Can the old law court, the old tragedy, do the new work? Can we renew our old institutions and art forms in light of present decay? Do we need new institutions, new art forms? How can our past truly become past, at least for a while? Right, so that's my contribution to this. I would like to now introduce our panel. So to lead that discussion, we have gathered today a distinguished panel. After the panel discussion, we'll take questions and comments from our audience. For now, please allow me to introduce our moderator and panelists. Their full bios are on your programs, and no one wants to be here till next week, so I'm not going to go into all the details. But I do hope you will join me when they take the stage in expressing our gratitude to them for giving so freely of their time and expertise. We're really proud that these people are here with us tonight. So first we have Ms. Lee Cullum, who is a prominent journalist and author of international renown, and a longtime fellow, we're proud of this, a longtime fellow of the Dallas Institute. Lee will moderate our discussion. Then we have Mr. Justin Moore, a prominent civil rights attorney here in Dallas, but with increasingly national reach. Occasionally you can read about something that happened in New York, and then they're interviewing the lawyer, and guess what? It's our board member, Justin Moore. So he serves on the board of directors of the Dallas Institute. It makes me feel special. And then finally, we're very fortunate, it's not funny. Finally, we're very fortunate we have Rabbi Nancy Kasten, who has been a leader in the field of ecumenical outreach and social justice in Dallas and internationally. We're thrilled to have them all with us today. So please take the stage. Lee, I think you might sit there. And Justin maybe here and Nancy in the middle. Did I do that right? No. Okay. Or wherever you like. Yeah, and so I think there are 2 microphones. You maybe can pass them around.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. You know, I have a friend who loves the Furies, and she thinks that today's Furies are Rachel Maddow, Joy Reid, and Nicole Wallace on MSNBC. And I love them, too. I think I don't want to get rid of the Furies. I think they're fabulous. I would like to say to Christine and Jilly Allison that I was once editor of one of your magazines, D. It's the only place I've ever worked that was making money. I'm grateful to you for that. And I have to admit that while you all were in New York running other magazines, we would order outrageously lavish lunches for 15 people, and and they picked up the bill. It was wonderful. I wonder if people do that well there now. I hope so. I want to say also, this is Rabbi Kasten's birthday. That's why she gets this nice place to sit. We've given her the throne, the place of honor. And of course, we have serious things to talk about. The Accommodation is it's a very sobering book. Justin, you've been a prosecutor in the DA's office. This book is about one hate crime after another. Did you prosecute hate crimes when you were a DA in the DA's office?
I never prosecuted hate crimes at the DA's office, but I have investigated them as a private attorney. And, you know, it's sad to say that hate crimes are only on the rise 30 years later. So, you know, we see a through line from what happened 50 years ago, 30 years ago, and it's continuing only to rise today. And it's really happening at alarming rates.
Well, it's a fascinating book, and it opens with the blue ribbon grand jury. That sounds so Dallas, doesn't it? A blue ribbon grand jury to look into terrible bombings of homes of African Americans who had moved into white neighborhoods. The neighbors didn't like it, would go by at night, toss a bomb. And this started in the 40s. It resumed in 1950. The grand jury was assembled in 1951 with leading lights of the community. C.A. Tatum, who ran the Dallas Power and Light, the electric utility, was on there. Ray Hubbard, the lake was named for him, an oil man who was chairman of the park board. He was there. Jim Chambers, managing editor of the Dallas Times-Herald. It was quite a group. And they were horrified to discover that the people behind these bombings were probably upstanding members of neighborhood groups, church groups, and probably with the complicity of the police. So what did they do? They decided to let that be, and I think they arrested a couple of operatives. I think one was named Arthur Young, one was named Craig Wright. That was easy to do. They indicted 10 people before they finally said, let us out of here, we want to be discharged. They indicted 10. 2 were Hispanic, 1 was tried, Pete Garcia. His neighbors and friends showed up and said he is a person of fine character, so he was acquitted. Kind of like Athena, you know, she acquitted arrestees. And the elders went along with it. It was a split decision, but she thought for the good of the whole, which is what Jim Chambers used to say, I'm told, the good of the whole, this is the best way to work it out. Did you see situations like this where the people who really perpetrated the crime were let off the hook and the operatives who were doing what they were paid to do took the rap?
Yeah, it's not as brazen now. I think our system, in a sense, is built to indict people if there's enough evidence to do so. And you see prosecutors sometimes not present enough evidence, or maybe they go overwhelmingly into an area in which they're being heavy-handed with certain evidence to get indictments. But I mean, I think that's an important point that you talk about, keeping the city as a whole intact. We have to look at what happened 50, 60 years ago and understand why these folks were bombing these black folks out of their homes. The reason why these black folks are getting bombed was because they were moving from West Dallas because their homes are being usurped by eminent domain, right? Which is we have now come to learn those eminent domain approaches towards getting black folks out of their homes was found to be unconstitutional, which could also be seen as a hate crime as well, but it was codified. So I think we had the physical violence, but we had the legislative violence that came from the city officials who ultimately ended up letting these folks who enacted physical violence off the hook through this blue ribbon grand jury. So I think taking it within this context, what I saw as a prosecutor fails in comparison to what the Citizens Council did back in the 50s with their blue ribbon grand jury, which was, I think, collusion.
One could call it a whitewash, could you not?
A whitewash, or it was a conspiracy, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
which is even worse.
which is even worse.
Well, in getting ready for tonight, I came across a wonderful book. Maybe Michael and Simi know of it. It is called The House of Names. It's by the Irish playwright Colm Toibeen. It's the same story. It's Aeschylus' story, the same characters, but he tells it in the first person, a chapter for Clytemnestra. She gives you her point of view, and then Orestes, and then Electra, and then back to Clytemnestra. It's fascinating. Well, Clytemnestra makes it very clear from the beginning that the age of the gods is over. There was no way the gods could have ordered the murder of her daughter so that the army of Greece could have smooth sailing with no winds on their way to Troy. Not possible. She is convinced her husband Agamemnon knew better. He knew the gods didn't order this. He knew it very well. But the army wanted it. They were superstitious. They certainly believed the gods demanded it, and so they demanded it, and Agamemnon gave in to them, murdered his daughter, just to make it all work out. Is this what we're seeing today? What do you think? That's what the city fathers, in a way, were willing to deny justice. Well, it happened only today. Did you read about the Minneapolis officer who broke into a house, killed somebody, won't be tried? So justice will be undone because maybe this will make Minneapolis, the smooth sailing for Minneapolis. Are we seeing the same thing?
Well, I have a local example. It's not as physically harmful, but last fall, before the legislative session, or during the legislative session, I guess it was last spring, a group of us went into Morgan Meyer's office to meet with his chief of staff about the voting, access to voting bill, SB1. And it was a group of people from Temple Emmanuel who had been very active in creating safe and accessible voting in Dallas, serving as volunteer deputy registrars and election officials, et cetera, and, went in to say to the chief of staff, there's no fraud going on. There's no reason for this legislation. And the chief of staff said to us very openly, he said, we know that that's true, but we have all of our constituents calling us all the time and saying, there was fraud, and we have to, listen to them. And so a woman who is a faculty member at UT Southwestern said, when my medical students come to me and they say that they heard that you're supposed to treat a certain illness with something that is absolutely not called for, it's my responsibility as the instructor to say, you know what, you're actually wrong. That's not how you do it. So where's the responsibility here? So, I think it's a parallel,
I think it's entirely parallel. It occurs to me that, I don't know if you agree, that unity is a word we perhaps need to drop. I don't see the country yearning for unity. I think there are groups that don't want to be unified with other groups. Maybe we need another word. In South Africa, they did a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Bishop Tutu put it together, who just died not long ago. It was wonderful. But I find myself, I'm interested with both of you. Well, first to you, how are you going to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission if you say, please come to our reconciliation meeting? You can't vote. We don't. No. We're going to make it as hard as possible. Nonetheless, come and be reconciled to us. Can it work when the affronts go on and on? They stopped apartheid in South Africa. Not that things were perfect, but.
Well, I think what worked in South Africa were personal, individual confrontations and conversations where people were allowed to see the humanity in one another. And I think our problem now, which has been a problem in Dallas forever, is that we're very attuned to making assumptions about each other. We're not very adept at having actual conversations with each other. And so in order to have truth and reconciliation, you would have to have, Marsha Jackson from from Floral Farms neighborhood, who was having to breathe in toxic fumes for 3-5 years because of Shingle Mountain, talk to the the perpetrators of that injustice and tell her story to them face to face and have them explain why they did it and why they didn't address it sooner. Have the city officials have that conversation with her and her neighbors. I mean, you can't do that by an edict.
What do you think? Does that make sense to you, Justin?
You know, I echo everything that Rabbi is saying, and I want to take it a bit further. I think the biggest hurdle for us to get to truth and reconciliation is understanding that the violence that we're all afraid of isn't the same, right? Black violence has always been from a position of self-defense. White rage and violence has always come from revenge or some type of premeditated approach towards violence. So, especially when listening to Bobby Kennedy, and obviously Bobby Kennedy was an incredible leader, and I don't want to take his words in vain, but even how he casted violence in his plea to the country to not go up in flames, he kind of made it analogous. And I think we have to disaggregate the violence before we can truly understand how to stop it. And we've seen since Barack Obama got in office, white supremacist hate groups, those numbers have only risen for the past 10 years. We haven't seen a similar rise with black nationalist groups. Those numbers have constantly stayed the same. So we have to be honest about the violence. We have to be honest about who's perpetuating the violence. And then once we get to that point, we can start talking about things that really matter, which is how do we get to a place where we can have a unified society. But if we keep on comparing violence and saying that they're equal, I think we're never going to get to that point because we're not listening to one another, right?
I also think it's important to think about what comes up in the accommodation about the way that city politics is structured to disempower the citizen, because I think that is still true to this day. And whether you have, whichever kind of city council government you have in this city, it is not possible for citizens to actually be heard in that context and listened to. And so you're not creating a situation where people can actually be seen and heard and responded to by the city officials, because there is way too much going on in those meetings. You have to take off days in order to have your 3 minutes at the microphone where half the city council members are looking at their phones, not paying attention. So that is not the way that we get to truth and reconciliation, and that's not the way in which we can improve our city and heal it.
You want to add something, Justin?
Briefly, I know you have other questions, but
No, this is good.
I mean, to our point, Dallas has a way of generating these kangaroo courts. And we saw that with the Blue Ribbon Grand Jury, and we see that with how city council meetings are being held. Folks come with their grievances, they're not really taken into account, and we kind of just move them along to get to the next item on the agenda. If we really want to get to where we're getting down to brass tacks and really getting through some of these darker periods in our history and in our present, we have to really start listening to folks that are on the receiving end of this very intense type of violence that they're receiving. And until we do that, we're going to keep on doing the same thing over and over again.
As I understand it, then, that the only real access a citizen has is through his or her own representative, a council member. How well does that work? Not so well, I can see.
Well, I always say that my job is created out of a sense of folks not having access to power or access to influence. There shouldn't be a need for civil rights attorneys if we're actually treating people with humanity, or if our representatives are actually listening to folks who are coming with grievances and they're going down to the Capitol and actually fighting it out for them. So the fact that my job exists means that there is some cleavage there, or there's some gap between the citizens and the folks in power, and nobody's filling that void. So, yeah, people can go to their representative or they can try and go to their council member, but as we can all agree, those are futile attempts at really trying to get redress for their issues that they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. I know you're going to answer the question, but also tell us about the Polyphony Foundation you're involved with in Nazareth. Could it work here?
Well, let me defer that question
all right,
for a minute.
Defer the question. I just want to put it, you can be thinking about it while you answer.
Okay. I will, and thank you for the opportunity to mention it, but I just want to say that really to be heard, whether it's on a local level, a state level, you have to either have a lot of money to either do it yourself or pay lobbyists to do it, or you have to have a lot of time. And it's true that certain efforts have been addressed because enough people put in enough time and effort to create a compelling argument. But there are so many issues that involve a lot of time, and people are working. The people who need it the most are working, and they have a lot of other stressors in their life. They're taking care of their own health needs, their children's and their parents' health needs. They are trying to keep a roof over their heads. They're trying, there are so many things that they have to take care of. And then in addition to that, they need to be activists at night, and organizing at night and figuring out how to get to the city council meeting on the day it's supposed to happen, and then find out that their issue is deferred from the morning to the afternoon, and, or till election day. I mean, so, and then in addition to that, you have the situation where our city loves to pay consultants to do a lot of research about what we should do about affordable housing most recently, or about, how to address crime and in our city with the KPMG study a few years ago. And they do these, studies, and they come up and they get the recommendations, and then they kind of pick and choose what they'll do, and then say we can't afford to do the rest of it. So, at a certain point, you really, so I think we really have to look at that, and we have to really be addressing this. I mean, this is going to take every single one of us deciding that we can't let this go on anymore. And I actually brought a quote from an editorial I read a couple of weeks ago from the New York Times about from a Russian who has been in the opposition in Russia against Putin for a very, very long time. And he's a journalist. And here's what he said. He said, and I think it's important for us to think about in terms of our own, we oppose these things, we're angry about these things, we're worried and upset about these things, but we don't feel like we have enough power to do anything about them. And this is what this person says once he's now seen his country perpetrate violence on basically their same country, right? I mean, it's their own country and their own country people. The primary responsibility for this evil lies squarely at the feet of Mr. Putin and his entourage. But for those who oppose the regime in ways big and small, the responsibility is also ours to bear. How did it happen? What did we do wrong? How do we prevent this from happening again? These are the questions we're facing. Responsibility is the key. There was a lot of good in the country I grew up in, the one that stopped existing 2 weeks ago. But responsibility is what we lacked. Russia is a very individualistic society in which people, to quote the cultural historian Andrei Zorin, live with a leave me alone mindset. We like to isolate ourselves from one another, from the state, from the world. This allowed many of us to build vibrant, hopeful, energetic lives against a grim backdrop of arrests and prison. But in the process, we became insular and lost sight of everyone else's interests. And I think that's really instrumental for us. Now, in terms of polyphony, which is a civil society bringing together of Jewish and Arab musicians in Israel, I think there are a lot of civil connections in Dallas that are happening. I think there are a lot of places where people of goodwill are coming together and doing really important things, creative things, exciting things together. I think the arts are a huge opportunity for that has been taken care of, taken advantage of. I think the symphony, the museum, Big Thought, all of these different organizations have really built on the love of human beings for each other and the desire of us to be in relationship with each other and not to dehumanize each other. And I think that's really, really important work, but we have to take it to the next level. We have to stop being overwhelmed and take responsibility for more than that.
me mention something to both of you. I'm picking up on something Michael said about the possibility of civil war in this country. There's a guy named Greg Treverton now at the University of Southern California who chaired Obama's National Intelligence Council. And every 4 years they put out a global trends report. It came out last year. Greg put his out in 2017. But in 2015 and 2016, before November 2016, he could see the seeds of civil war. And he said, in his view, it will not be a third battle of Manassas. That's just as well. Battles 1 and 2 didn't go very well for the Union. He says, instead, it will be a battle between lawyers like you and secessionists. And what finally will result is a much looser federation. I think we're already seeing this happen. I mean, I guess you saw Governor Newsom only last week say, well, don't you worry, Texas, we have some good laws for you out here, women of Texas. You'll be happy here. And people are going to start choosing where they live, not just on the basis of tax law. And of course, we have Californians coming here because they like our conservative values, so I was told. That's true. Anyway, then I also ran into a young woman who said she wanted to move maybe to Seattle because she worried about her children in school. Someone would come in and shoot them all. So are we going to see a resettling of America in terms of the body of law, where you can vote, where a woman can get health care and so forth, where everybody doesn't have a gun?
I mean, I would love to see a resetting of people respecting the laws of this country, but I don't see it moving towards that direction currently. I mean, we had people on January 6th trying to overturn an election that was, legally conducted, and Joe Biden legally won the...
Now, you know that was just tourism.
Right. Right. That what? Right.
What you doing here?
Can I sign up for that excursion without getting arrested? I don't know if I can. But I mean, even with how the legislature, they're actively trying to change abortion laws here. Not even just here, but across the country and other states as well. I mean, there is a concerted effort by certain factions in this country that are trying to overturn well-settled law. And I think that's going to be where the dividing lines are when it comes to this notion of, is there going to be a civil war that's going to be fomented by these spirits of dissension, so to speak. There's going to be these laws that have been well settled that people just don't like, right? I don't like it when a woman goes and gets an abortion. It makes me feel some type of way. That's what they're thinking, right? Or I don't like the fact that black folks or minorities can vote unencumbered. Let's change these laws. And do you think we're going to sit back and allow these laws to be changed that are protecting our rights in this country? I don't think so. But that also goes back to this notion of violence, right? Who has this type of premeditated violence, and who is really just defending themselves? And if that's going to be the line of demarcation that's being drawn, I don't see anyone stopping that line from being drawn currently, because people just don't have a respect of the law, and I think that's not going to change, especially when you have folks like Tucker Carlson and some of these other, pardon my language, idiots. Creating these feedback loops of just conspiracy theories that are very racist and misogynistic. What are we going to do about that? I don't know. And you're saying lawyers like me are going to fight in the Civil War? I don't know about that.
I've heard a lot of interviews with Ukrainian lawyers and software engineers and all kinds of people who never thought they would be fighting. And it's so interesting, but I think that comes from a spirit of commitment to a nation that I don't know we have anymore in this country. And I think that's a huge problem that's been building for a long time. I guess I look at some of the people in this group that I've worked with on migrant issues in this city, and how we've struggled to welcome and integrate people from other countries who have no state, who have suffered and have come to this country. And I think about the fact that we're very preoccupied right now with the Ukrainian border, but we have our own border that we're not really paying that much attention to. So I don't see splitting off into more, into a looser federation is going to be the answer. I think that maybe nationalism as a whole is falling apart. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and the question is just going to be how much violence has to take place in order for us to reorganize in a way that where we can actually share our resources in a way that respects the humanity of everybody. But I also think the one hopeful thing I see about Dallas, which I've wondered about forever, is why hasn't there been more violence here? And that is a hopeful thing, because I think if people really are more afraid of the violence than they are of each other, then maybe we have some hope.
Well, we're going to turn to all of you for questions, comments. I have a friend who used to say, you need not disguise your comment as a question. That's good. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, we do have people on live stream. We hope you're still with us, and we'll hear from you. Anybody? While you're thinking, I'll give you another quote. This is from Thomas Mann, the German writer. He said, if ever fascism comes to America, it will come in the name of freedom. Think about that. Well, freedom to be hateful, freedom to, yes, please.
So the one that we mentioned, Polyphony, is actually a group in Israel. It's a music education group. They do classical music orientation for children in schools. They have a conservatory, and they also have seminars where Jews and Arabs, both Muslim and Christian Arabs, get to know each other. They play at the same music stand together. They travel together, and they have a lot of opportunity to get to know each other, interact with each other, and then create something really outstanding. And there's also an orchestra, the Galilee Orchestra, that has been around now for about 12 years, and they were it's the only Jewish Arab orchestra in Israel, because there have not been Arab classical musicians that have been trained and who perform in Israel in the past. And so now there's an orchestra, and they just performed at Carnegie Hall a couple of weeks ago, which was very exciting. They've been invited all over the world actually now. But I think, for example, I know that Kim Noltemy here with the Dallas Symphony is doing a lot of work to bring music education into public schools here in Dallas and into neighborhoods in Dallas that might not be exposed to it otherwise. I don't know. I think we need to keep working on the opportunities to bring people together to really get to know each other and to know each other over time, and not just to make things, sort of a one and done experience with, these kinds of opportunities to cross our silos of life and our isolated existences and really create things together and become invested in each other's well-being.
I should have went first because those organizations sound great, and I think mine fell in comparison. But I'm working with the Marcus Garvey family. We're creating a leadership institute for Pan-African leadership. We're working with people from around the globe, really teaching them how to face some of these globalized issues when it comes to racism, classism, extreme poverty. So that's one organization that we're actively building currently. And another organization, which you know about, is the Liberation Fund. It's an extension of my work, but it also goes into matters that are kind of correlated with poverty domestically. So civil rights issues that have kind of that co-committant, poverty type of spiel to it. So what we're doing currently is assisting folks who have been on the receiving end of state-sanctioned violence. But we're also transitioning to working with homeless folks who have been saddled by debt while they might have been imprisoned or while they have been housing insecure as well. So we're trying to ease that tension that they're feeling as they're actively trying to get stable housing. So those are two organizations that I'm working with. I'm probably working with more that I'm not thinking about, but those are the two that I'm really invested in right now.
Anybody else? Yes. All right, for our live stream people, you were saying some very important things about Dallas being a little buttoned up when it comes to the arts. Fort Worth more freewheeling. Everybody should come in and everybody should have a good time making art. How can we create a more generous and imaginative community for the arts and for all our people? Did I get that right? Okay, good.
Well, I'll just say I'm a member of a board member of this institute, this fine institute here, and I think we do a good job of bridging that gap. Now, I think what you're saying is you want more citywide investment into the arts. Well, a lot of what we do is we try to broker that among city leaders. So getting involved with the institute is a great place for you to start. Shameless plug. But an important plug, because what we're doing here is incredible. We're having conversations like this. And as you all know, or maybe you might not know, this book was banned. Maybe not banned, but it ceased publication for a while, for whatever reason. I think we can assume what the reason was. So there is a history of trying to censor the arts in this city. And we know that the arts can spur conversation about change that's very needed. So again, join the Institute. We're going to keep on having conversations like these. And hopefully, through these conversations, we can get the powers that be to really make a real investment into the arts like you're suggesting that we need.
You know, I just want to say something about your comment about this being a religious community. Because I think that the arts require us to imagine ourselves in someone else's place or through someone else's eyes. And we associate Dallas not just with religion, but with fundamentalist religion. And I think there's a lot of religion in Dallas that is not fundamentalist, and we have to remember that. And part of my organization, Faith Commons, really does try to help people understand that their faith is part of their idea of being able to see themselves in other people's place, and that imagination is not contrary to faith. It's actually an important part of faith. And to try to bring that voice into the public square as a faith voice, not to say this is the secular voice, or this is the the non-faithful, the non-religious or the anti-religious voice. No, this is a religious voice saying, so I wonder if we as faith leaders can, maybe pay more attention to how we advocate for the arts through our religious institutions.
Yes, Clark. Is it Clark?
Yes.
All right, good.
Formulating this as I go, and I'm not sure it's reached the point of a question just yet. But I want to take advantage of the fact that we're not just here discussing the accommodation, but we're here also discussing the Oresteia. And with the Greeks, perhaps jumping to a different Greek author, but I think there's a tendency when we discuss these issues to look at things in a big, grand civic picture. We are still all Dallasites at heart, for better or for worse. And we love those kinds of big questions. But we're talking about the Oresteia, which frames this question of this kind of civic trauma in a very individual, a very personal, a very, at most familial setting. And we're, of course, working with the same culture that produced the Republic, that produced this image of the soul of the city as these mirrors and ways of understanding each other. So now I get to the point where I have to figure out exactly what the point of this was. But I guess what I want to ask is, how can we bear on this Greek wisdom of the soul and the city acting as reflections of each other, and take some of these big picture ideas, these grand civic, national, legal aspirations, and bring them into the individual level, into the soul level, into the level of the spirit and the imagination. And I think it's been touched on a little bit, and actually a fair deal so far in the conversation, but I just wanted to put it out there directly.
Okay, just a moment. Let me just tell our online people that what Clark has said very elegantly and eloquently is that the Oresteia is talking about the city and how imagination is mirrored in various ways. This great work was written at a time that gave us Plato, that gave us Aristotle, that gave us Western civilization, really. And I think you're asking how can that be brought into our own city and our own lives in a way that's transformative. Is that? And personally transformative. Oh, yeah. Okay, can I mention one line from the Oresteia? Remember, Orestes says, I have suffered my way to truth.
Right. You can only get wisdom from pain, right? That's so thinking about your comment or question, comment/question. I had a tough time reading both of these texts at the same time. And the reason why it was hard for me is because the beefs that were being played out in the Oresteia, they had moral justifications, right? So it was, well, Agamemnon, he thought he was morally justified in sacrificing his daughter so he could win the war, right? And for all intents and purposes, that was allowable by the order of that day. His wife, I'm not going to try and say her name because I can't pronounce it. She thought she was justified, and she was. She was morally justified in revenging or, getting revenge for her daughter's death. Then you had Orestes, who was morally justified in killing his mother, right? There were all moral justifications there for these beefs that were being settled. Now, the beefs that were being settled in the accommodation, there weren't any moral justifications there. Right, the eminent domain piece, so they could build this levee and invite business interests into Dallas. There wasn't a moral justification there. That was a business justification. Or the fact that there were bombings in South Dallas. There wasn't a moral justification there. Or even the fact that there was eminent domain for the folks who lived around Fair Park. There wasn't a moral justification there for any of that violence. The only people that would have been justified in resorting to violence would have been those folks who were getting their houses taken, or those folks whose houses were being bombed. But we never saw that type of violence. We saw a fear of violence because there was an acknowledgement that, if these folks resorted to violence, they might be morally justified. But they never did. So that was the hard part in really jiving those two texts. And so I don't know if we can use the Oresteia as a blueprint for what we need to enact in our society today, because the folks who are morally justified in using violence don't ever resort to it. So how can we use that as a blueprint? Those are just my thoughts. And I'm glad you asked the question, and I haven't really thought about it deeply, but I'm glad you asked it. And maybe once I leave here, I can think about it even more intently. But this is a question that we all need to think about. How can we save a city when the people who are morally justified in defending themselves never do?
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
Okay, a simple question. What keeps you up at night, and what are you going to do about it? Could I mention one thing? I mean,
Rent keeps me up at night because rising house prices, not being able to find a house too, and I say that in jest, but I also say that with a bit of seriousness as well. A lot more folks are becoming housing insecure due to the nature of the housing market here, and I think that's a huge problem, and that's only going to continue and create more issues. So that does keep me up at night.
There are a lot of things that keep me up at night. I don't sleep very well. But I think I do just fear that we are we're scared of suffering, and so we try to distract ourselves from the suffering that's happening, and so we tend to focus on the beautiful things and the new stuff and the the shiny things, right? And how great Dallas is. And it was Reverend Freddie Haynes who said and says all the time, we are a tale of two cities. And I think that the thing, it's really interesting to me. It's going to be interesting to me to see how this read of the accommodation actually plays itself out in Dallas, because, this is just exactly the epitome of what our state legislators don't want us to do, right? Let's not look at our responsibility for things that happened in the past. Let's just say that was the time and that was permitted at the time, and so it was okay. And of course, that isn't happening anymore when we know it is. So I think that, if we don't prepare ourselves and prepare our youth to suffer while reading this stuff, and to say that unless we do, we're not going to make things better than that, then we won't have the hope. If we can do that, we will have hope, and we can have hope. So I think it's a great test of our city.
Could I mention one thing more, Michael, then to you? I don't think that we can leave this room without remembering the great Louise Cowan. I saw her in this room giving the most extraordinary speech I've ever heard. But I also heard her lecture on Moby Dick at one point, in which she said, "Don't stare too long at the fire, at the infernal, or you will lose your bearings." And what she meant is look at it, see it, and then go do something about it. Put it out. Michael.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for that conversation. And if you felt like you didn't get enough of it, well, don't worry, because here at the Dallas Institute, we are very committed to the ongoing reimagination of the city. And so as part of that effort, we intend to continue to have seminars on the accommodation as long as people are willing to sign up. So watch our website and tell your friends, and if you would like to, oh yes, I've been prompted to say social media. I don't know what that is, but the kids are all up into it today. So anyway, we're going to continue to pursue this and similar conversations. So meanwhile, I would like to introduce Ms. Jilly Allison, who will make a few final remarks. She is currently the president of D Magazine Partners and is leading the program and event planning efforts for Big D Reads 22. Please.
Let's just do one more round of applause for the Dallas Institute for hosting us tonight, and of course our incredible moderator and panelists. Well done. Yes, so what is Big D Reads? You might be wondering. We are a group of individuals and institutions who truly believe that we can bring Dallas together. It happened through 2013, 2015. D Magazine was instrumental with the Communities Foundation of Texas and Dallas Public Library on reading citywide books. And when Will Evans got the rights back to the accommodation, we all looked at each other and knew that we had to do this again. So our committee is fundraising to print, and we will print 25,000 paperback copies of the accommodation, a special edition, which will be released for free in August, with a citywide read happening throughout September. So this is why we're here. This is what we are going to do, and thank you. Now I'm a little nervous, but we're going to do it. And we clearly have a village who has come together to make this happen. So I specifically want to call out our partners, the Communities Foundation in Texas, who's been my partner in crime on this, but especially Amazon, the Dallas Foundation, the Addy Foundation, the Dallas Mavericks, and Thomson Reuters, who have really stepped up to make this possible. And I think it's a great sign, obviously, that the business community and others are willing to put their names and dollars to make this happen. We are still $70,000 short, though, of our goal. This will not only help us make sure that we can get the copies, but we want to fund conversations like this, because I have a small hope that we can change how we think about the Dallas way and what is the Dallas way by making these conversations possible and bringing people together through this important discussion. So we would love your help. If you as an individual are so inclined to help support us, you can donate on our website, bigdreads.org. If your organization thinks it, or you can have this conversation internally, we would love to support that and get you on board as a sponsor. Again, we only need $70,000 to get to the finish line to ensure that we can do this right, because the book deserves justice, but more importantly, our city needs this. We also would love to start sparking ideas of how you would like to take this and run. And so the vision for September is that there are arts performances and book club readings and boardrooms and living rooms, and kids are talking, students, probably seniors, are talking about this text with their teachers and in conversation with their parents, and that this truly is a citywide activation. So if you want to get involved with helping us plan the programming, or you just want to take this and run, please find me and we'll give you the tools. Stay in touch on bigdreads.org. And thank you, because we are going to do this. We're determined to make this happen, and we won't be able to do it without you. Thank you. Good night. Good luck.
I'm just saying, if you want to continue the party, come next door. Food and wine. Let's go.